Introduce myself. I'm Matthew Rao. I co-chair BeltLine Rail along with Patty Durand. And as we get started, we've got a packed agenda for the next 90 minutes, and we have a special guest speaker, Ryan Gravel, who will speak to us about 30 minutes in or so to our agenda, maybe 45. And we look forward to hearing what Ryan has to say and to updating you and hearing what you have to say about where you think light rail on the BeltLine stands and how you can join us to help promote that during this election year. Looks like we're still having people get started, but I'm going to start the meeting. BeltLine Rail Now is a citizen advocacy group composed of volunteers. We are not affiliated with or funded by any other group. We are dedicated to the completion of light rail transit on the BeltLine as envisioned in the BeltLine plan by 2035. We were formed in 2018 when Ryan Gravel and Kathy Woolard created the group in response to the first MARTA draft, which left 2/3 of the BeltLine loop without rail. Our mission is to promote affordability, accessibility, sustainability, and to accelerate the timeline of rail construction on the BeltLine, which MARTA now says will be sometime around 2040 to 2050. The BeltLine always was, and this week, with so much going on that has to do with equity and with basic human rights in our state, I want to take the opportunity to link what's going on there at our state legislature and in our city to what we're doing here. The BeltLine always was a rail project in service of different ideals, bigger ideals of sustainability, accessibility, providing transit to reduce inequity, and to change this access so we can unify this city. For those who want to refamiliarize themselves with where the BeltLine is, it is basically the red line that goes around this map courtesy of ABI and their website. It intersects with the MARTA system at 4 cardinal points. How and the quality of that intersection is up to discussion, but the BeltLine is a circulator. It stitches together the urban fabric that has been ripped apart over the years or never was together to begin with. I want to recap just briefly some of the things we did last year, because this is our first public meeting in quite a while. We held virtual campaigns, campaign forums for the District 57 race and included the 4 top candidates in that. And we had a town hall transit in a pandemic with both Jeff Parker and Clyde Higgs in attendance. We spent a lot of time cultivating and building relationships on the south side of town, on the west side of town. And what went on at Murphy Crossing, which many of you followed, was part of that. And we met a host of new folks that have helped us get input from and participation from those neighborhoods. We attended every single ABI public meeting for the Murphy Crossing RFP, and we kept bringing up transit. And as ABI kept saying transit wasn't their job, and technically speaking, it wasn't, we felt that our work on the RFP made a better RFP in the language that finally came out. We also did something quite big. We completed 6 months of research that started last July and released Atlanta BeltLine Rail, a blueprint for transit funding. Our Michael Fleming did a huge lift in both researching and writing the paper. And just as we released it in January of this year, we were surprised to see that one of those funding mechanisms we recommended was the center of legislation that our city council eventually adopted to finish the concrete trail, but not to provide any additional infrastructure. I want to thank many of the people on this call. There were dozens, if not more than 50 of you who either spoke, wrote, or directly or indirectly at a meeting or to your council person in support of rail on the BeltLine. And we have to believe that this legislation, while not quick as fast as the legislation that went through the state House, Senate, and the governor's office this week, it went through pretty fast. From introduction to approval, there was really very little debate. It appears to have been somewhat of a foregone conclusion. And that's really sad for an infrastructure tool like an SSD not to deserve the scrutiny and expansion of ideas that we promoted. But we were very active with that. And we had really a communication and media bonanza. And I want to thank in particular Mark Broadbeck, Beth Smith, and Eric Goldberg for their efforts on this. We briefed elected officials, and we did more. This is just an example of one of our own, Lawrence Miller, speaking out and challenging a representative from ABI that there really is light rail on the BeltLine. And then this quote, I think, really says it. The BeltLine is already beginning to choke on its own success, and we're seeing uneven outcomes, including rapid gentrification, because we've only built part of it. We must choose a different path. We can and should fast track construction of the BeltLine. And that's what we are about this year, in this election year. Let's see here. We've also released, and you're the first to see it on this meeting, and if you copy this link, I also can put this link in the, oops, go back one. If I can copy, I can't copy and paste from here, but you can download this right now here. It will become public soon, but this is really a two-page executive summary of why today the BeltLine must be built and how we can afford to do it. The funding white paper really is taking the legs out from underneath the argument that the reason we can't have the BeltLine is money. We've kind of laid waste to that myth, and now the conversation has to be about something else. And let's see. And so here's a summary of our funding strategies and just a preview of the funding white paper. I'm going fast through this because we've got a lot to cover, and I want to have as much time for your questions and for the breakout rooms that we're going to have later in this meeting. We're using the technology of Zoom to allow all of you to participate in direct conversation with each other and us. We also have put a number on what it's going to cost to build the BeltLine rail in its entirety based on today's dollars and the inclusion of 4 infill stations, which are not part of any of MARTA's plans. And that's $2.5 billion. In perspective, what is $2.5 billion? It's about the same cost as the 5 miles of the Clifton Corridor Phase 1. It's about half the cost of the people mover at the Los Angeles International Airport that's being built right now to connect its airport to its light rail and its rental car facility. It's 22 miles. This is perhaps in the country the biggest bang for buck transit project there is. And why that is, we can talk about offline. The funding pie and financing tools are outlined in the white paper. And we undertook in February and March an ambitious briefing campaign. We've met twice with Matt Westmoreland, twice with Andre Dickens, twice with Amir Faroqi, and once each with Dustin Hillis and Jennifer Ide. In those meetings, in addition to talking about the funding white paper, we've emphasized that the first build on the BeltLine, this 1.4 miles, and then the 0.9 miles of in-street light rail, which is an extension of the streetcar from its terminus now at Jackson Street and turnaround onto the BeltLine up to Ponce City Market. This is the buildable segment right now. This is the segment for which we have given MARTA over $200 million in sales tax receipts, and which will cost about $150 million. They want to build this in 7 to 8 years. There's no reason it can't be built in 3, and our message to elected leaders and candidates is to get behind this right now. We are targeted to meet with City Council President Felicia Moore, and with Nadalyn Archibong, with Carla Smith, Cleta Winslow, and Antonio Brown. Felicia, as you know, is running for mayor, and Nadalyn is running for President of City Council, and Carla, Cleta, and Antonia are each seeking re-election to their posts. We've also met with candidates who are running for office, including Liliana Bakhtiari, running in District 5, Mandy Mahoney, also running in District 5. We are in conversation with and will be meeting with Jason Dozier, and we will be meeting with other candidates who have announced and as they announce. I want to talk about something that has become part of our meeting. Really on Friday, it joined the agenda because on Thursday, the MARTA board met with its capital projects committee, and it approved $500,000 to restudy the locally preferred alternative, the LPA, which is light rail on the BeltLine, with the eye to solving the transit gaps, they call them, or rail gaps on the BeltLine. These are areas where, from the beginning, it has been known there's going to be a difficult or more challenging solution to connect two segments of the BeltLine. These are places like Halsey Yard, like where the BeltLine crosses 10th Street and goes through a parking lot at Park Tavern, like at the north end of the BeltLine near Armour Yard, where there are two railroads and a grade alignment issue involved. If you just listened to this meeting and you didn't know anything more, you might appear to conclude that they are doing their due diligence, and that's all they're doing. But there might be reason to conclude that there is a pretext here for concluding the project can't be built at all. I just want to emphasize that more delays in studies do not equal a commitment to move forward with the LPA. This study they've approved here is shown in bright blue, called feasibility study. MARTA wants to take 2 years to plan and study the streetcar extension before they build anything. It's really quite ridiculous. Other cities have built dozens of miles of rail in the period that MARTA wants to build 2.25 miles. They've hired an outside consultant that they've never used before. And as I said, they're spending $500,000 of precious more MARTA money. The locally preferred alternative, and which includes where the BeltLine rail would go, and that it is light rail, has been previously selected many, many times. And my question would be, why revisit this again? The rail gaps, as I've said, were known from day one. Why are they questioning them again? Board member Durrett, Jim Durrett, said in the meeting that that it wasn't certain that light rail was going to be the conclusion. Why is he saying this now? You can watch this board meeting here at the link that's here and conclude for yourself what you think. But we will be following up on this story. Some of you may already be aware that it exists. And again, to reemphasize,
reminder that this meeting is being recorded.
Yes, and I will say that we are recording this meeting, and it will be available on our website. The locally preferred alternative is this. It's not this. Now I'd like to get to the part in the meeting where we're going to be joined by a very special individual. There would not be a BeltLine without Ryan Gravel. He almost needs no introduction. His master's thesis at Georgia Tech had real legs when he showed it to Kathy Woolard, who was a leader in the city council and eventually city council president at the time. And he's been a leader both in the design of the project and the reasons behind it. He's co-founder of BeltLine Rail Now, and he's a frequent consultant to us, as well as a continued inspiration. His blogs pertaining to the BeltLine are published on our site under our resources and facts, and on his own, ryangravel.com, where there are those blogs and others that connect all of these philosophical ideas together. So I'm going to welcome Ryan to unmute himself, introduce himself, and share some time with us.
Hey, Matthew, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
You can. Great.
Hey, everybody. It's great to see you. It's great to see the work that's advancing with BeltLine Rail Now. And I'm both continue to be committed to and excited about the project, but the current both national sort of situation condition is getting me excited, and the MARTA meeting that Matthew just mentioned has also got me pretty riled up. So I'm glad to be here with y'all today. And, you know, for those of us who survived 2020, you know, congratulations. It's been a tough year for a lot of people for lots of reasons. And, you know, I feel real privileged to still be here and able to meet with all of you and continue to advocate for this project, but also for our city and our lives. I'd rather see you in person, but that'll be soon enough. I'm excited about 2021. It's an exciting year for a lot of reasons. Most notably, we have a president who likes trains. He rides them, he values them, and he sees the impact of transit beyond just moving people and things around. He hired a Secretary of Transportation who starts discussions about transportation with equity and understanding that we're not just building systems to move things and people, we're building our lives. And those investments impact different populations of people differently, and transportation investments are an opportunity to start to right the wrongs of the past, level the playing field, and look ahead at our best, most inclusive and diverse and equitable future. So I'm excited that the BeltLine has always been there, but that now it's positioned really well to help us deliver that outcome after the last several years has really beat us up, you know, quite a bit. If you're part of BeltLine Rail Now, then you already know this, that lens of equity is really important, because not only must we implement transit if we want the BeltLine to live up to its promise, but also when you look at transportation projects regionally and nationally through the lens of equity, the Atlanta BeltLine really stands out. It always did since the beginning. And, you know, when you look at transportation projects through that lens, then the BeltLine is at the top. And I think that despite the limitations of MARTA and some of the other challenges we've had with transit implementation of the BeltLine, that will really resonate with the new administration and with the new dialogue around equity in transit. So that's exciting. I think we're in a really good position for 2021. As Matthew noted, I think that our challenge is and has been in fits and starts for 20 years now. Our challenge is really that our local transit agency, MARTA, has always struggled with the BeltLine. They never quite understood it. They have taken it on over time, doing LPA, doing all kinds of studies and, you know, planning and effort, you know, but they never really quite understood it. They always saw it as a transportation project. They never saw it as the way that we see it, which is about building the city that we want, building the lives that we want for ourselves. And MARTA's never really prioritized it. They've really struggled with it. So to Matthew's point, you know, we don't need another feasibility study. We already have done that. MARTA has already done a feasibility study, multiple studies. They have a locally preferred alternative. We've done all of that work. MARTA has said themselves that the BeltLine transit will carry tens of thousands of people every day. MARTA is stuck in analysis paralysis, and we need them to take this project forward. We need action before it's too late. You know, I am excited by, and like I said, kind of riled up by that. Our job is to keep reminding them that those are our tax dollars. This is what we voted for. This is the kind of lives that we want, and that we have expectations that life is going to be built in ways that allow the people who have been at the sort of margins of our society, who are most vulnerable to the change that's coming to Atlanta, that they're given the tools to survive that change. And part of that is the implementation of transit on the BeltLine. And we've been talking about it for a long time. It's not new. They need to do it. Anyway, so shout outs to BeltLine Rail Now and everybody else for continuing this fight. It's not over. We got a long way to go. But like I said, I think 2021 is a really great year. Really excited about where things are. Thanks to ABI always, and especially to Clyde Higgs, who stood up for transit the other day on WABE. Thanks to all of you who are out there doing the hard work, sending letters, making noise, social media, calling your representatives of MARTA, your local council reps, and everybody else. We got to keep going. We got a lot of work, but it's an exciting time. So thanks again, and I'm always here whenever I can help.
Thanks, Ryan. It's really good to hear from you and to get your perspective on where we are, and to be reminded that we are still advocating the original goals of this project, that's where we are. It's about what kind of city we want and what kind of city we're willing to fight for, and whether or not, I almost can't blame MARTA as a transit agency for not having the vision that we're having here. They're not charged with that as a transit agency. We are charged with that, and we are charging them with building it. And we understand it, and we've been voting for it, and we're paying for it. And that's what we're going to talk about.
But I just want to interject there. So you're right. And in a conventional sense, transit agencies generally do not see themselves in that way. And frankly, neither do the Department of Transportation or anybody else. But I think the new conversation at the federal level, and increasingly, I think with just advocates across the country, not just here, is that we have to think about these things as interconnected. That transportation is interconnected with climate and equity and justice and housing and everything else. They're not separable. And when we allow our agencies like MARTA to think of their work as separate, as distinct from everything else, like as if it doesn't have any impact, then that's our failure as much as theirs. And we need to start holding them accountable, and we have to make sure that they know that we are going to hold them accountable to that.
We are a little ahead of schedule, but there's one thing I forgot to do. And on those words that you just said, Ryan, is a good time to do it. We have been recently joined by 2 new board members in February and March, and they're both on today's call. And I'd like to take an opportunity to let them introduce themselves to you. Lawrence Miller and George Cheedy are both big activists and advocates from different perspectives. Lawrence, would you unmute yourself and introduce yourself to us?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm J. Lawrence Miller. I am the president of Historic Adair Park today, and was the chair of the Murphy Crossing Coalition. Some of you have probably have seen me in the ABI, Atlanta BeltLine Inc. meetings, sort of encouraging them to listen to what we at the neighborhood levels have to say. Part of the reason I joined BeltLine Rail Now was because in this city that has historically used transit to intentionally divide us, mostly by race, I'm offended that from the very beginning, transit, specifically rail, was supposed to be included in the BeltLine, and it appears to me that they're doing everything they can in order to push that off and almost ensure that it doesn't happen. And I refuse to allow that to be. So I'm glad to be a part of a group that is advocating to ensure that rail happens. It happens in a timely manner, and that we've had some success in getting them to the table and arguing them down when they didn't want to come to the table, and being able to use those voices in order to help the BeltLine Rail mission move forward.
Thanks, Lawrence. Welcome. And we're really excited to see just how tenacious you are and how willing you are to speak up in meetings. During the SSD so-called debate and the city council hearings on it, Lawrence was a caller and a commenter in just about every meeting. George, are you on the call, and can you say some words to us?
Sure. Hey, I'm George Cheedy. I write a column for Decatur-ish. I'm a contributor to The Intercept. I have a show on Fox 5, and I just launched a Substack newsletter looking at politics and business and crime in Atlanta. In order to get this done, you're going to have to kick the ass of people I don't like, and I'm kind of here for that. The equity issues are what's got me to the table. I've been watching rail and transit for probably about 15 years. I go all the way back to Emery Morseberger and the brain train out to Athens, for those of you who are nerding out about such things. The idea that they'll build this trail that will put a lot of money in the hands of people who didn't grow up in Atlanta, most of whom are white and affluent, while Black people are living under the most unequal economic situation in America, is intolerable, and this might fix it. So let's go.
Thanks, George. Welcome. We are going to have some questions, but I know that we have been joined today by at least one person who's running for political office, and it's been our tradition in these meetings that when we are joined by elected officials or candidates, that we give them a brief opportunity to introduce themselves, not to campaign, but to tell us what they think about rail on the Beltline and their stand on it. So Liliana Bakhtiari, who's running in Council District 5, is on the call. Liliana, would you unmute yourself and introduce yourself to the group? I think Liliana's here. Oh, she's here.
I see her. She's here.
Hey guys, give me one. Hey George.
There we go.
Hey guys. How are y'all?
Great.
Hang on one second. Let me get to a place that isn't super loud because I'm doing this. I'm working in a coffee shop today.
Also, if you've got a camera, we would be delighted to see you, and not just your very professional headshot.
I'm proud of that headshot. How are you guys?
Great.
Can you guys
Thanks
see
for
me?
joining us. We can. Go ahead.
Okay. So one, thank you so much for having me. I've been speaking with Matthew and Patty quite a bit, but they were kind enough to let me introduce myself on here. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Liliana Bakhtiari. I'm running for Atlanta City Council District 5. One of the things I've been really excited and talking with Matthew about is supporting BeltLine Rail Now. Obviously, our city is growing at a very rapid rate, but we have a $1.5 billion backlog and infrastructure issues. We're gridlocked. People are moving into very expensive homes, they're moving into $700,000 homes, expecting $700,000 infrastructure and transit, and are obviously not getting that. So we've been talking about MARTA expansion, obviously, for quite some time. We had Emory annexed in so that the Clifton corridor could be built, even though they meet the criteria for the density for federal funding. And one of the big critiques I had of that, as well as I know many others, was that BeltLine Rail has the capacity to be built a lot faster and for much, much cheaper. And it's also what Ryan's initial plan was, to actually have transit, not just the sidewalk, that connected the city. And what makes one of the fastest ways to tackle equity in the city is actually making it so that people can get places more quickly, not just being walkable and bikeable, which are kind of transit can be utilized by everybody. So looking at the white papers and the map that I was able to read over, which were really descriptive and made the mission of BeltLine Rail very accessible to a lot of folks. It did a really good job of showing where we could start building corridors and for what cost, which we have the money for. And quite frankly, I'm a little confused as to why we haven't started investing in that yet. But it's very clear that if we don't start providing alternative forms of transit and investing in it, that a lot of the progress we've been building in our city is going to be built on clay legs. So there's a lot that we need to do. There's a lot of movement that needs to be put behind this, political will that needs to be put behind this. And I look forward to helping to make that happen. It's a very big priority for me, and why I feel very lucky to be here and introduce myself to you guys today.
Thanks, Juliana. We hope to hear more from you. And in our breakout rooms, which are coming up soon, one of the topics is campaign forums. And those of you on the call who want to discuss that and how we're going to do that later this spring, summer, and into the fall, that's one of the things we're working on. Thanks so much. We also have a couple of other candidates for office on the call today, I am told. Clarence Blaylock in District 1. Please feel free to unmute yourself and address the group briefly.
Yes, let me get the video on. Okay. So my name is Clarence Blaylock and I'm running for City Council in the 1st District. I just wanted to say that I wholeheartedly support the goals of BeltLine Rail Now, and this is what people voted for. So I just think we need to implement it as soon as possible. I don't believe these other projects that they're not the priority, and BeltLine Rail is the priority in the 1st District and in the city. So
Thanks, Clarence. I'm glad you could join us. And then I understand we also have Jeremy Sharp on the call. Jeremy, would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Hey y'all, good afternoon. How you doing? My name is Jeremy Sharp. This is going to be my first call with BeltLine, so I do appreciate everyone for even having this meeting, having this space. I am a candidate for Atlanta City Council, post 1 at large. I'm a transit rider. I live downtown. I have been a transit rider for the last 10 years. I don't own a car, don't want one. So for me, transportation isn't just an issue that I'm viewing from the outside. It's something that I really want to even solve for myself. So I'm very vested in it. I 100% support BeltLine Rail. I remember I spoke with even Rick one time at maybe a meeting last year with the Center for Civic Innovation. And we had a great conversation there. And I'm 100% in favor of rail along the BeltLine. You'll also hear me say, and if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see that I'm 110% in favor of just transportation, the highest form of transportation along the BeltLine. Me living here downtown, I'd love to see the streetcar get extended further east onto the BeltLine up to Ponce City Market. That's definitely a dream come true. While at the same time, for me, I'm always very focused on equity, seeing how we can make sure transportation happens across the entire BeltLine. So even me being on the call today, I'm very focused on seeing what we can do there. For me, it's always looking towards the future and what other alternatives we can really have besides just rail. But, I always like to be very clear. I'm 100% in favor of rail along the BeltLine. I want it to happen, but I always want us to be looking towards the future and considering every other alternative that is also out there.
Thanks, Jeremy. And we might not get to it in this meeting today, but we've had and do have a lot to say about the answers to your questions. And we'll be meeting with you in the coming days and weeks and look forward to sharing what the answer to that is. We are going to have some questions here, so we could have that be one of them. And I'd like to take a moment to introduce my co-chair of BeltLine Rail Now, Patty Durand. And Patty, would you, we have about 15 minutes for questions so far. Would you like to moderate that for us, please?
Absolutely, be glad to.
Thanks, Patty. The way to ask a question is to raise your hand. And the way you do that in Zoom is to go down to your toolbar, and under reactions, there's a raise hand. And Tony will let us know the order of hands. You can also put a question in the chat box, which he is monitoring. There's one question here. Patty, if you go, there's a question here that was put in the chat box actually earlier. Okay. From Jim Thompson, and it has to do with Microsoft and Google. It's in the chat box at 134.
All right, so let's see if I can find that. I don't see a chat box at 134.
Okay, let me put it in here to everyone. This is the question.
You can go ahead and ask it, Matthew.
Yeah, the BeltLine project, let's see here. Wait a minute, oh, that's not it, 134. Obvious question raised. And Jim, if you want to elaborate on this, you can, because I'm not sure I quite understand the question. Obviously, question raised, expectations, possible rail funding from Microsoft or Google. It sounds like the question is about, can ABI or MARTA or the city accept money to fund rail infrastructure directly from a corporation like Microsoft or Google? I think there are two experts on this call, Michael Fleming and Ryan Gravel, who might speak to that question. Michael or Ryan, would you like to take it?
I think corporate partners like that could be champions for future iterations of the special assessment concept where properties pay extra property tax. They could be the sort to lead that. It's different. That's something we addressed in our white paper. Different question altogether to just get corporate philanthropic funding or something like that. Not something we've thought about in any detail.
In our funding white paper, there is a concept. It's the initials SALAD, salad, and it has to do with creating a special district at a radius from a future or present transit station, and to tax those entities in it at a special rate so that they contribute to the cost of building that infrastructure. So that is, I think, what Michael's referring to.
Okay, so I'm going to call on Doris Betts, whose hand is up. Doris, if you want to unmute yourself, we'd love to hear your question. Sorry, you're muted, Doris. Matthew, are you?
I see Doris. I've asked to unmute. I've asked her to unmute. But
all right, while she figures that out, let's move on to James Burge. James, can you unmute yourself? And then we'll come back to you, Doris. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. My question was about what is the primary purpose of the rail and the BeltLine for connection? Is it to connect people to jobs? Is it to connect neighborhood to neighborhood, or people to retail, or all of the above? The reason I was asking is because the route mainly goes through residential areas and not so much to employment hubs. So it was like, what kind of, how many connections that would actually like make a difference in people's lives?
Yep. So the original vision was to reclaim an abandoned rail bed. So the path follows that rail bed, and it just coincidentally goes through over 40 neighborhoods neighborhoods that were previously segregated in the early life of the city. So it is a huge benefit that it does connect neighborhoods, because it will make Atlanta more seamless, more integrated. And it also does go through major job centers like Piedmont Hospital, I think is maybe the third largest employer, but is a very large employer. And of course, Quarry Yards is going to get a lot of development. And then East Side BeltLine, as we just talked about, is getting Microsoft and Google's on the BeltLine. So it does all of it, James. It hits a lot of very important points in terms of equality and gentrification, sustainability, and mobility. It hits all of those areas. And what Ryan referred to earlier, we can decide what kind of city we want. And we want a city that has got clean air, that helps people get around whether they have a car or not, and that reduces inequality and gentrification. So let's move on.
Patty, yeah, go ahead.
We have a few other questions. Doris, do you want to try to unmute? Or put your question in the chat, how about that? And then Skylar, I see your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Oh, Doris, we can.
Doris,
yes,
there you are.
Okay. First of all, I want to say that it's been my personal opinion for very many years that Atlanta will never be a first-class city, ever, until the BeltLine is made a reality. And secondly, what I'd like to say is that $500,000 that MARTA wants to use for yet another study that is completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
Is something like that a done deal, or is there anything we can do to put the kibosh on it?
You know, Doris, that's a good question. And we on the BeltLine Rail Now board have been trying to decide what to do about it. I think Matthew was a little more circumspect, I would say, than I am. So I'll just go a little bit further than Matthew did and say that we believe that MARTA is trying to issue this, has issued this RFP and has engaged with this out of state or unknown consultant because they know the outcome they want, and they want it to be a bus rapid transit. And that's what we've heard on the back channel, that they are trying to undo all of the studies, and it's really dirty pool. And I don't know there's anything that can be done about it, Doris, but we just found out about it a few days ago, so we're trying to figure that out.
Thank you for asking that,
It almost
Doris.
sounds like MARTA is jealous.
We don't know what MARTA is. We're not sure MARTA remembers how to build anything. It has been more than 20 years since MARTA has engaged in any construction of transit, of rail transit. And its present leadership, it's really outstanding, because as Michael Fleming and we did the research and writing of the white paper this summer and fall that's just passed, what we saw is that medium and large size cities around the United States are all investing in significant amounts of rail transit. We just lost the director of transportation for Atlanta BeltLine Incorporated to Phoenix, Arizona, grid car city in the middle of the desert, spending $1 billion on rail right now. And Henry will be there to oversee that. Henry Ukwa was the director of transportation at ABI. And where is it, what we don't see that we saw so many other places is enthusiasm for investing in the rail infrastructure of the city. And what those medium and large size cities are showing us is that they're getting ready for their future. The city design plan for the city of Atlanta shows a doubling of the city's population in less than 30 years. Where are those people going to go? Where are the areas of the city that are capable of supporting density if they were to be built that way? There aren't that many if you assume that you're not going to tear down the tree canopy and you're not going to tear down single family houses that already exist in historic neighborhoods. Where can they live? They can live in a few areas, and the BeltLine is a 22-mile corridor where they can live. We ought to be talking about, instead of a paltry goal of 5,000 units of affordable housing, we ought to be talking about 25,000 or more. There is a question here from Michael Bull. Patty, do you see that?
Yep, I'd like to call on Skylar Hassan next. Skylar, if you would unmute and let's hear your question.
Hi, thank you. I actually have sort of a two-part question that's slightly different. So one, what is it that I can do right now to help try and get this started, to help move along the process as an individual, or also as part of a group that I have, because I am also transportation chair for the neighborhood planning unit W. I'm wondering how I can help with that from that position. And another thing relating to it, do you know what the current status on Halsey Yard is? Because originally I thought that was bought by the city of Atlanta a couple of years ago. Apparently that did not happen, and it's sort of just sitting dormant. I'm not sure what exactly happened to that. Do you know any info on that?
So for the first part, we are going to get to the what you can do toward the end of today's discussion. Thank you for asking that question, though. And I don't know who on the Ryan, do you know the latest update on Halsey Yard?
I don't have any real intel on it. It is being used very lightly by a new facility that was installed around the time that everybody thought it was going to be for sale, and the community did their planning effort. My understanding is that facility could pretty easily, it could be anywhere, and it could pretty easily move. So I would anticipate that in a reasonable near future, that it will ultimately be for sale. When they took it off the market, or they didn't, I guess they never put it on the market. When they said that they weren't going to sell it, it's not like they went back to using it as an intermodal facility. They're using it for a minor purpose that could really be anywhere. So maybe they're holding their time. You know, they're not in a hurry. So I don't see any reason why it couldn't happen.
Yeah, I guess we don't have strong intel unless somebody else does.
Well, we know it's not. It's to answer the question, it's not owned by the city of Atlanta, and the 4 neighborhoods that adjoin Halsey Yard completed in late 2019 a master plan for what to do with Halsey if the city could buy it or it could be sold. The 75 acres. What was striking about their master plan is it showed how planning could really happen. It was a privately funded but public process, and it showed more engagement and input in just 6 months that the designers used to create a master plan with density and transit at the center. And this is one of those areas where they are calling for an infill MARTA station and a tunnel under DeKalb Avenue and the existing and active CSX railway. So all of that is available. We can get that to you offline, or you can see some of it in our white paper. But right now, there's no indication that the railroad is selling the property, but the neighborhoods are prepared. Yep.
So CSX there was recently a town hall CSX about Halsey, and they claimed that they had never intended on putting it up for sale, but the neighborhoods are calling for, because obviously I live right next to Halsey Yards, but the neighborhoods, because they've now made it kind of like a loading area. So the noise is so horrific that the neighborhoods have called for the noise to end, because it's beginning now, sometimes as early as 5 or 6 a.m. they start vacuuming out these train carts, but the neighborhood's calling for it to be, they don't want, Reynolds-Town, Cabbagetown desperately want it to be something other than a train yard.
Yeah, we're familiar with that. Yeah,
it's there, but CSX has not been very responsive to anything that the neighbors are asking for. But yes, they claim that they had never put it up for sale. I don't know how true that actually is.
That's true. It's never been up for sale.
That they were never intending to. I mean, there seems to have been, because I think Ryan can speak to this, there seems like there had been a conversation, but I don't know what happened there.
Well, let's move on. Let's move on, because we have one more question, and I think it's time, unless you don't want to ask this last question. Matthew, do you want to move on or ask the question?
Let's ask the question.
Okay, so this is from Alan. I'd like Ryan to answer it. As passed, the more MARTA legislation passed with a specific map of projects. Would dedicating all funding toward BeltLine Rail not impact projects that have also been approved, such as Campbellton Road Rapid Transit? I love the idea of LRT on the BeltLine, but how do you sell the idea of prioritizing what seems like an amusement ride to some residents over providing mass rapid transit for the Southwest area?
I'll answer best I could, although I suspect that there are BeltLine Rail Now folks who would be equally.
Of course, but since you're with us, let's hear from you.
I'll say, first to correct the fact that there was a map associated with the More MARTA vote. Unfortunately, it was a map. It was a map of every transit project and the kitchen sink. There was no MARTA did not imagine that they were creating a priority list for their limited funding to implement projects. Although the way that it was marketed and featured, it very much prioritized the BeltLine, at least in my understanding of why people voted for it. So while people did vote overwhelmingly for it, ultimately the city did not require MARTA to prioritize any particular list of projects on that, which is why the Campbellton Road project and other things were moved to the front. That's not necessarily what the public voted for, though. The public didn't vote to move those projects to the front. The public just voted on a massive list of projects that we would never have money for. The amusement park ride, I mean, that's funny and all that. We've answered that like 1,000 times. I don't really want to waste my time doing it right now because I've done it like 80,000 times. MARTA's own studies show that it moves tens of thousands of people every day, and it would do better than any other project that they've been looking at. They just don't want to do it for some reason. And so, you know,
Okay.
I don't know.
Thank you, Matt.
I'm not going to get like angry about it. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a funny, right? But it's not very constructive.
I would say this, Alan, and this is to Alan's question, and that is, if you take a look at our transit funding white paper, we're not talking about the argument that the BeltLine would be built, the BeltLine Rail project would be built at the expense of other projects is a false argument. And our transit funding white paper is talking about growing the pie of funding. Every single city we looked at around the United States that had successful funding of transit did so by enlarging their local contribution to transit funding. And ours comes really only from sales taxes, and which are regressive, as we know, and subject to recession. And so if you take a look at the pie that we produce, it's a bigger pie. We think everything in the More MARTA program is needed, everything, and then some. When we build more MARTA, we will still be behind where cities like Denver, Colorado are today in the number of miles of rail that they have. We will be vastly behind cities like even Salt Lake City and Seattle, cities that aren't as big as Atlanta. So to say that we have to choose and we can't build one instead of the other, it's a false choice.
Matthew, can I jump in for just a little bit and talk about some specific dollar amounts in our proposal?
Please do. If you want me to show a slide, I will.
Sure. I'll make myself visible here too. The way the MARTA board decided to divide up the $2.5 billion that's going to be expected to come from the More MARTA tax was to allocate a little less than 600 million for the BeltLine, meaning stretch out decades and get the job done. But our approach, our funding white paper is all about matching the sales tax dollars with additional things like special assessments and a more aggressive goal for federal funding, using some federal highway funding for transit purposes. So the $2.5 billion that we think that the BeltLine will cost is not taking the entirety of the More MARTA sales tax, but it does require a higher allocation. And our primary approach to that is to take the $1 billion that MARTA intends to spend without any matching funds, no contributions from community improvement districts, no federal funds. The dollars that MARTA wants to spend on projects that are 100% local, if they will also leverage and stretch those dollars, there'll be more MARTA tax available for all the projects in the More MARTA list, including Campbellton Road and the Clifton Corridor. One other thought I want to share about the previous question of like, what is the core purpose of the BeltLine? From my personal point of view, before the project even got off the ground, there were 100,000 people in the neighborhoods that the BeltLine serves who didn't have a good connection to MARTA Rail. So making the home side of the transit trip to work, even if that's still the core transit pattern, you've added the home trip by creating a connection to MARTA. And then in the future, as the city grows and that amount of population along the BeltLine becomes 200,000 or 250,000, then you also have great opportunities, especially at the intersections with MARTA, for job centers to grow, all in a way that doesn't require a car if you live along it. That's it for me.
Thanks, Michael. And just for everyone, this is also in the appendices of our funding white paper. This is more MARTA. This is the final plan that was adopted by MARTA and also is part of the ARC 2050 plan. And when we call the BeltLine the J, that's sections A, G, D, B, and C. This is what we mean. And I'm not going to dwell here because we have the breakout rooms to get onto. But again, we advocate for all of it, and we're showing a way for the BeltLine to be built in 15 years. So now we're going to get to the next part of the meeting, something we've never done before, and we're going to create breakout rooms. And let me share my screen here with those. And just many of you have participated in meetings with breakout rooms, but you're going to have an opportunity now to join a room of your interest. And here are the rooms. We have Outreach 1. This is focused on local outreach to NPUs, neighborhood associations, and other organizations to reassert their support for completion of rail on the BeltLine. Outreach 2 will be focused on business associations and groups. We have candidate forums, which we alluded to earlier, where this group will develop ideas for what we're going to do this summer with virtual and perhaps in person by that time, candidate forums and webinars. We have 2 watchdog groups. One is to monitor ABI in the city of Atlanta, particularly the city council, for news about transportation as it impacts the BeltLine. And the other is Watchdog 2 to monitor MARTA exclusively for the same. And then we have a fundraising campaign. What we're going to do and how we're going to be involved as a 501c4 in this election is going to cost money. And we're going to talk about that in this group. Here's how it works. Tony, our moderator, our co-host, will open the breakout rooms and you will select the one you want to join. Each breakout room has been assigned a BRN member who's going to facilitate the discussion in that room. The session is going to last about 20 minutes, and then the facilitator will present the ideas as we come back together as a group, and you'll be given a message. So Tony, if you want to create those rooms now, we can all join. In the interest of time, I'm going to, okay, everyone should be coming now. Let's see if Beth is here, and we'll go in order. She's not back yet. So I'm going to go out of order. I chaired Outreach 2, which was about going to businesses, and I will share some of the notes we had. And we had 3 participants in our room. We have a virtual town hall scheduled with one business association, Old Fourth Ward neighbors. Jeremy Sharp, who was in our group, said they're one of the strongest organized, but we also want to get to organizations in Buckhead and show Buckhead that this is in their interest. Some of the problems is people don't know what's happening on the BeltLine. Jeremy has compiled a list of every business that's on the BeltLine with every individual business owner. So this is something we could take advantage of in reaching those businesses that are not represented strongly by organizations. There's a communication issue. It's one thing to look at NPUs, it's another to look at businesses. The one organization we're already talking to is one of the best organized. One goal could be to talk to every last business on the corridor. So I'm going to stop my share. And Beth, if you're back on the call, why don't you report from Outreach 1? Let's go to Eric Goldberg, who did campaign forums, and then we'll come back to Outreach number 1.
Hi, yeah, so we had a nice discussion. We had city council candidate Clarence Blaylock on our call from the southeast part of town, and he talked to us about how he's hearing from constituents, folks that have been in touch with him, that BeltLine Rail isn't a priority. We also discussed some ways we can host a candidate forum that would be interesting and informative. And one point was brought up by someone in the breakout room that this should just be one way that we're raising awareness about BeltLine Rail Now, and I completely agree.
Did you guys get into at all the structure of forums or or what they might look like?
We didn't get into structural details or, yeah, that.
Okay. Beth, did you find a way to make it?
I've made some progress, so I'm just going to read this. One of the ideas is that we create videos in order to communicate the idea more clearly and in a much more accessible way to reach new people. There was an emphasis on going back to the NPU neighborhood groups and getting them to recommit to BeltLine Rail. But there was conversation about the fact that the NPUs are not accessible to everyone. And we need to make sure that we can communicate to the typical person and help them relate to how transit will actually impact their lives. Stress in our messaging, the link between transit and affordable housing, that there really has not been enough progress in Atlanta on the affordable housing front, and you truly cannot have affordable housing without transit. Then there was another comment specific to emphasis on equity, and that perhaps people tune out when the message is coming from BeltLine, or they see transit, transportation, rail. They're not tuning in for that, but they would be more inclined to tune in when the message starts from the equity perspective. There was an emphasis on getting the NPUs to all sign off on unifying language that the NPU groups could adopt. So that would basically require some participation in drafting that language, and then going around to the various NPUs to make sure that it's worded in such a way that all of them can feel confident, much like our original petition that we delivered the 10,000 signatures to the mayor's office with. I think that hits on all the highlights. If I missed something important, please somebody let me know.
And I want to thank Michael Black for sharing the whiteboard from, we could all see it large.
Well, thank
Thanks,
God.
Michael. Okay. So
if I can answer the question that's in the chat about it, there was a from Cardin. It was clarify what when you say NPU meetings are not accessible to all because the meetings are public. I don't know what AFAC means, something, but the reason why is okay. The reason why is because in person, it's often a challenge for a lot of elderly people to get to the meetings. Held at sometimes they're held at inopportune moments, which might keep parents who've got children from being able to attend it. These days, we're doing it via Zoom calls mostly, and even with that, it's very difficult. You know, we have 100 seniors in our neighborhood that we try to tie into the calls, and they find it very, very difficult to access this. That's what I mean by accessibility. This is not just about folks in that middle area who have little difficulty in attending meetings or listening in on meetings. We're talking about people that are outside of the middle margin of folks that just can't attend for one reason or another.
I would just quickly add that in addition, every MPU operates differently. We all have our own individual bylaws, and some are run as true democracies so that everyone that shows up can vote, but many are not run that way. There are a handful of people who have been entrenched forever, and they control all power of what decisions are made. So in that sense, it's not accessible for everyone to have a voice in every MPU meeting.
Thanks, Kay. We're about to run up against our time that we promised we'd end by. Let's go to the watchdog groups 1 and 2. Who wants to report first? Watchdog 1, City Council, and
yeah, happy to do it. Mark
Thanks, Mark.
Frybeck here. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Awesome. I'm sharing my screen. If you can see it all right.
Well, you get the award for best whiteboard, Mark. We have to take
Well,
lessons
I
from
know
you.
that there was the whiteboard functionality and I completely missed that lesson, so I just wanted this word.
Okay.
We had a great group, and we were assessing the watchdog of the ABI, and then of course Atlanta City Council. We had great representation, a lot of transit advocates there, as well as representation from MARTA and expertise for the city of Atlanta. So it's really good. We were looking at ABI as making sure we have attendance at their public engagement meetings, the stakeholder meetings that they have periodically. Weren't sure if they were monthly or quarterly, but make sure that we are there to take in that data. And then to find out if the board meetings are public, if we can sit in on those, if that has been requested or is allowed, and make sure that we are there when information is disseminated. And then much as BeltLine Rail Now has reached out to the Atlanta City Council, it would be prudent for us to begin reaching out to the ABI board members as well. Looking over at City Council, the attendance to all the Finance and Community Development, Human Services Committee meetings is critical, and that the conversation between council members at that time is often rich with content and intent, if you will. And that, of course, Atlanta City Council is subject to the Open Meetings Act, as is MARTA board meetings, so that for us to be present and perhaps conspicuous at those meetings would also be valid. And then to continue to meet with the should-be council members and make sure, as we talked about, just making sure that we are there and fully represented.
Awesome.
And if there's anyone on my team that I missed something, please let me know. Appreciate y'all being on. Cool. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to Michael Fleming and Watchdog 2. MARTA.
I think we could add, similar to that same list, there's organizations that we want to be monitoring. In addition to MARTA, also the ATL board. We did a little kind of more of a brainstorming session about a lot of different topics. Some of the things in addition to the BeltLine to keep a watch on includes just funding in general. For instance, COVID relief money is sort of just being banked for future budget shortfalls. Is that the best use of that money? Things of that nature. Something that I don't think came up in either watchdog group, though we've talked about it amongst our BeltLine Rail Now board some, is to also begin taking somewhat of an investigative reporter's approach to the Atlanta BeltLine Partnership Board. 28 members of that board. Some of the leadership hasn't changed in 15 years. And a lot of that leadership seems to be well entrenched and connected with Atlanta's nobility. And I think there is some investigation and discovery of interesting relationships that can be had there. And I'll stop there for now.
Okay, and then we had one final breakout. Patty, do you have anything from, I didn't monitor, did you have people join you in fundraising?
Nope, nobody. I didn't expect
Okay.
any to, so that's fine.
All right, well, this is a good time to segue into why we are going to need fundraising. And I'm gonna share my screen again, and here's what's next at BeltLine Rail Now. We are focused on the election of city leaders who are champions of BeltLine Rail and will lead on the issue. We're going to work toward defeating candidates who are either apathetic or opposed. We're going to watchdog MARTA to assure light rail remains the LPA, locally preferred alternative, and responds to pressure to accelerate the timeline. And we see that as complete to Ponce City Market through the Old Fourth Ward in 3 years, with completion of the J in 8 years, and completion of the entire project by 2030. There's an asterisk there because negotiation with the CSX Railway is required, and 2035 is our stated goal. And who decides this timeline? It's the mayor, the city council, and you. And I want to close today with a reminder about why this is so important and what actually building rail means. And this is a quote that came out of our research in the white paper and it's the commitment to build rail is the ultimate expression of faith in your community. It says your hometown has a future, and its people believe enough in that future to make investments that will outlast them while paying dividends today. So I want to thank you all for joining. This was an incredible statement of support with so many of you registering and joining the meeting and participating in these first ever breakout rooms. You can type, I'm going to leave the chat open just a couple of minutes longer. We will answer questions that are posed in the chat. If we know how to find you, we should be able to cross-reference you with your email. So Patty, do you want to say anything more in closing?
Yep, I wanted to but let everyone know that we are going to have another one of these meetings in May, where we're going to outline exactly how we plan to approach our campaign, the Atlanta City Council campaign season, with how we plan to support and defeat champions or the apathetic. So there'll be a lot to come, a lot of things we need for you to do. But in May, we'll outline specific steps on how that'll happen and how you can get involved.
And Donald Shockey, your question, are the big pocket Beltline property owners like Jamestown contributing to the effort? We didn't make it a slide today, but we are in communication with some of these entities, and we will report back to you in May about that. Some of them don't necessarily want to be known at this stage, but there is support.
And we are going to need financial support from all of you in whatever amount you can give, whether it's even $5 a month or more if you can, to help finance our campaign work. And so more to come on that. We'll be sending an email to you asking for your donations soon. And then in May, we'll explain exactly how the money is going to be spent and what we'll do with your gifts. So we're going to ask for large gifts from developers and businesses that will benefit from the Beltline, but also small gifts from people like you. So that's coming, and we really appreciate anything you can give.
Thanks, Patty. All important and preview for our next big meeting.